UK-EU is not the only diplomatic showdown. There is another one unfolding, this one more serious and more violent. It's between Sweden and Iraq. Today, hundreds of protesters turned up outside the Swedish embassy in Baghdad. Take a look at the pictures. They stormed the building, set fires inside and shouted slogans well into the day. Thankfully, no one was hurt. Sweden says all its diplomatic staff are safe. But what triggered this outrage? A controversial decision by the Swedish police. They have given permission for another problematic protest, this time outside Iraq's embassy in Stockholm. Reports say it's not just any protest, they're planning to burn and desecrate the Quran. A similar protest was organized last month as well. One man burnt pages from the Quran in front of a mosque. Sweden allowed that protest to happen. They said this was freedom of speech. You may remember the backlash that followed. Every Muslim nation lined up to condemn Sweden, but clearly no lessons learned. So that explains the why of today's protest in Iraq. But it doesn't answer the how. How did hundreds of people just spontaneously decide to gather at the embassy, and that too just hours after Sweden's decision? Because this was not just public outrage. There was an element of planning. Today's protest was called by this man, Muqtada al Sadr, a powerful Shia cleric in Iraq. His party has the most number of seats in Iraq's parliament. So why isn't he in power? Because Iran does not like him. Parties backed by Tehran hold considerable influence in Baghdad. Al Sadr did not get their support. So he's not in power, but he's out on the streets and still formidable. Take a look at these pictures now. They are from July last year. Muqtada al Sadr supporters stormed Iraq's parliament. They staged a sit-in and refused to leave. The next month, in August, there was a repeat. And this time, the presidential palace was targeted. My point is, Muqtada al Sadr specializes in these sort of protests. Gather a lot of people, storm important buildings, and send a strong message. But will Iraq's government listen? Well, they have condemned the attack on Sweden's embassy. At the same time, they had a warning for Stockholm. If another Quran is burnt, we will cut all diplomatic ties. For good measure, they also expelled Sweden's ambassador to Iraq. So Baghdad means business. And how is Sweden responding? Well, they summoned Iraq's ambassador this morning. They also accused Iraq of failing to protect their diplomats. But what about the Quran burning? No word on that. In many ways, these are two extremes of politics. One ignores and insults religion. And for what? Wrong ideas of freedom of speech. The other milks religion for political gains. I would say both are problematic. Just look at Sweden's reaction to the last incident. This is what they said. The burning of the Quran or any other holy text is an offensive and disrespectful act. Expressions of racism, xenophobia, and related intolerance have no place in Sweden or in Europe. It sounds perfect, right? But weeks later, another Quran is set to be burnt in the same country. Makes you wonder what is going on. You're admitting that something is wrong and xenophobic, yet you're doing nothing to stop it. Free speech cannot be limitless and racist, because then it's a slippery slope. What if Iraq turns around and says, storming embassies is freedom of expression? Would Sweden accept that? They shouldn't, because it's not. At the same time, burning a holy book is not acceptable. As for Iraq, their problem is the opposite, too much religion. Muqtada al Sadr is a cleric. He thrives on using religion in politics. Some say he wants to do in Iraq what Ayatollah Khomeini did in Iran. Never stopped him from violence, though. Al Sadr's men have been accused of killing Iraqi Sunnis. They've been accused of massacre. His own fellow Muslims. So I guess it's all about politics of convenience. Muslim nations lined up to criticize Sweden last month, but how many of them talk about China's Uyghurs? None. This trend of using religion in politics is a dangerous one. Simply ignoring it is not an option, because then you turn into a Sweden. No red lines, no respect. But Muqtada al Sadr and his protesters are not the answer to that. You need common sense policies that respect all communities, both their rights and their sentiments.